that's something I've seen in a lot of my generation, is, people becoming obsessed with their own health and their own bodies, I think, in a way, because you can have a certain degree of control over like how you look and how fit you are and like how well you eat and how much you go to the gym and this sort of discipline, because you don't actually have control over your life. You can't buy a house, you can't find somebody to settle down with, but at least you can have a six-pack.
Hi, it's Meghan. The podcast is back. I am slowly recovering from losing my house and the fires out here in Los Angeles. So thank you for your patience. I just want to say something quickly about this conversation. This is an interview with River Page, who's a reporter at the Free Press. Initially, I asked him to come on to talk about a piece he recently wrote about the online right and what's going on with all those crazy anti-Semitic, misogynist, everything horrible and disgusting memes, and whether or not that's going to ruin the party or conservatism or MAGA or whatever. We do talk about that, but the conversation really wandered in some unexpected directions. And we talked about sort of what's going on with young people more generally, like what's going on with men. Why are they so obsessed with fitness and like living till they're 200 and just bizarre kind of health rituals and just kind of what's going on with people's dating lives and sexual lives and all of that. So it's a great conversation. It's not just about the online right. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks again for your patience. We are back. Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I am your host, Meghan Daum. This is my first interview post wildfire. I'm coming to you from a makeshift studio. So fingers crossed, everything is plugged in correctly. And thank you for your patience while I got myself sorted out here a bit. My guest is River Page. River, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. You are a reporter at the Free Press, where you recently published a piece called "The Online Right is Building a Monster." And this is a phenomenon that I've been observing for a while, and I've always had a hard time figuring out the precise contours of it. You break it down very concisely in this piece, and I wanted to have you on so we could sort of continue that here. So I want to start by asking you to elaborate on something you say in the second paragraph of the piece. You say, for those of you who are offline, it is important you understand how bad things have gotten on X Twitter. So why is that important, and what are people not understanding?
So the reason that it's important is not that everybody in the country is on X. It's actually the opposite. The people who make culture and who make policy and who do journalism in this country are on X. It is an elite platform. And this has always been the case, even when Twitter was left wing and we saw how that, the crazy things that were being said online and when Twitter was a left wing echo chamber reverberated through the media, reverberated through culture, reverberated through policy. To where, non-binary used to be this like weird thing. This is the example I give. Non-binary used to be this weird thing that only people on the internet talked about. And then fast forward 5 years and it's all over in the media. There's TV shows with non-binary characters. It's in corporate HR policies. It's everywhere. And that is because the people who are in control of culture and of policy in this country are on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. That is the elite platform of choice. Now, X has become a right-wing echo chamber. And my theory is that basically everything that happened to the left is going to happen to the right. Things are becoming more and more insane because when you Twitter sort of uniquely and its algorithm fuels conflict. It's the hate site. It's the site where people get on and they debate and they argue about things. And the algorithm fuels that. And so when there are no more libs left to own on X, the conservatives have to start going after each other. This is what happened on old left-wing Twitter when right-wing people, many of them were banned, including people who weren't like straight up Nazis. They banned the Babylon Bee for like making some, trans joke or whatever. So when you have people who are more or less on the same side, if you like, coming after each other and cultivating an increasingly insane party line, that's going to reverberate through the culture, and it may not happen today and it may not happen tomorrow, but when it does happen, people are going to catch wind of it and it's going to freak them out. Normal people who are not on Twitter, who have not seen the development of these ideas, who have not been immersed in them all day, every day. The things that I see on Twitter every day, I feel like if you, showed a regular person Holocaust denial, crazy stuff about, interracial marriage, people being against it, people saying that, biracial people should basically feel bad for existing, like all this stuff that I see pretty much every day. If you showed this to a normal person, it would freak them out. They'd be like, what the hell? Like, this is not, these people need to be dealt with,
Right. So I want to make sure people understand what we're talking about, because we're not talking about just sort of banal negativity or like, this is ugly. Like, this is supremely ugly stuff, cartoonishly ugly. So, I mean, you say, you write in the piece yesterday morning, like I do every morning, I woke up and immediately opened Twitter. The first thing you saw was Elon Musk reacting positively to a post alleging that Tom Hanks is a pedophile. Then you saw somebody named Lord Miles, who's a conservative travel influencer, talking about he's talking about being Anglo-Saxon and should not be ignored. I mean, you've got like Andrew Tate. I mean, this is, can you just actually give some examples? I mean, I can pull up my feed right now. I mean, I'm literally pulling up Twitter and I'm seeing like, what kind of retarded ass judge decided not to give them the life or death penalty? I don't even know what this is referring to. I mean, just like absolutely vile sewage.
Yeah.
So people need to understand.
The Lord Miles thing, let me explain that, because that explains like how insane things are going and how weird it would be. So there's this thing on right-wing Twitter now where like, a lot of people are anonymous on Twitter, and there's these big giant right-wing accounts that are all like accusing each other of being secretly Indian. And I think some of them are Indian, which is also kind of weird, but they're, it'll be like, defending Western civilization against the Muslim hordes, but then it's an Indian guy, or they're suspecting it's this whole game where they're trying to root out who isn't Indian. And it's kind of funny, but it's also like crazy. It gets crazy racist. I think another example I cited in there was somebody referring to biracial children as failed Jewish science experiments. This was like a reply to another super racist tweet. It was the top comment. It got like 2,000 likes or something. A lot of, very recently, there's been a lot of crazy stuff about gay people. Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, he had a kid with his husband, presumably by surrogacy. And there's all these tweets now that are like, why do gay men only ever have male babies? And like they're basically like accusing Sam Altman of like having a child, quote unquote buying a child to like molest it or something.
Right.
And I mean, I think there's like some principled reasons why people can be against surrogacy, but the truth of the matter is that Elon has also had several children via surrogacy, and nobody is saying anything about that. They're only attacking gay people. It's getting the amount of homophobia you've seen lately has really gone off the rails in a way that I haven't seen on the internet in like 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other examples, but it's just a few.
Okay. And so the people who are doing this would defend themselves by saying that this is trolling, they're shit posting, this is not serious. It has a flavor of an in-joke. So to me, like, that makes it not necessarily totally analogous with what we were seeing on the left. Like, the left's version of this was like, that they would say that they were punching up. Like the conservatives had power, the right wing was in power, so they were punching up. They were making fun of whoever it was on the right, and they were sort of asserting their queerness or their otherness or whatever it was, and it had a different flavor. So can you talk about, like, where are these people coming from on the right? How many of them are joking or think they're joking?
I mean, I think some of them maybe started out joking. I don't think a lot of them are joking anymore. I mean, you don't like post pictures of Auschwitz and like post like 6 paragraphs about how it's fake. That's not a joke.
Right.
You know, it's not even conceivable as a joke. There's also a victimhood complex on the right that I don't think people realize, that they don't really seem to believe that they actually are in power now. In some sense, they think that the left is still in charge of everything, and therefore everything that they're doing is justified. Everything that they say is justified.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a prime example of that was when Elon rehired Marco Ellis, the Doge employee who was saying, like, normalize Indian hate. I wouldn't date somebody outside of my race, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, this was framed as a journalist trying to cancel a kid. And it's like, well, he's not a kid. He's a government employee. And he said some crazy racist stuff on the internet. Now, does that necessarily mean that your life should be ruined forever and that you should be permanently unemployable? No. But does that mean that you get to immediately go back into a very important position in government? Like, I don't think so. And, you know, they're still sort of positioning themselves as the victims of this hyper liberal culture, which is on the backslide. I mean, corporations are taking up their DEI policies. I think all of this is good, by the way, but it's this weird sort of thing where the left would also always argue that, you know, we're not really in control because,
right,
you know, corporations still run everything. But the truth is that the corporations were totally amenable to their sort of the cultural politics of the left, and they're not really opposed to the cultural politics of the right either. Corporations are interested in making money, and whatever the sort of mood of the day is, they're, you know, willing to go along with it.
Who are these people? Are they bots? Are they Americans? Are they teenagers? How do we know who they are?
I mean, a lot of them are not teenagers. Some of them are anonymous accounts. And I know they're not teenagers because they've been posting for years, you know, so if they were, even if they started,
okay. I mean, my impression is that the majority of them are anonymous. I mean, at least the really in your face, ugly ones, Auschwitz jokes, like, I don't even know if you would call it a joke. Just, I mean, the shocking stuff, it seems like it's a cartoon avatar or like a Grecian, you know, like some kind of like ancient Rome reference avatar. And who are these people?
Yeah, there's a lot of those. And then there's also, what is that MMA guy? I can't remember his name. Who's always Scott Peters, I believe is his name. There's a lot. There are some that, especially the anti-Semitic counts, who are, you know, they are who they are, and they're open about that. Andrew Tate's obviously on Twitter now. Just says like the worst things you can imagine about like women.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a mix of anonymous accounts and non-anonymous accounts. That was kind of true with the left too. I mean, you had a lot of like big accounts that nobody really knew who they were exactly.
Okay. But like with the left, you had this kind of thing, but then you had university professors retweeting it and amplifying it and sometimes generating it. You had people who were sort of fairly high up in cultural institutions. You had people of influence on the left, and it was normalized. I mean, it was sanctioned, you know, and it was, again, like it was seen as this is progress. We are so, by definition, our otherness makes us downtrodden. So anything we say, the personal is the political, it's all okay. This has like, the bullying is more, it's just less subtle. Like it is so in your face that, again, I cannot figure out like how this is, how they are not going to completely lose the room like very, very soon. And I know that was the gist of your article. Like they are going to, the right is going to eat itself the way the left did. I mean, is that an accurate summary of your point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, even if you look at like Trump almost kind of seems to get this a little bit too. Like if you've always followed his campaigns, I mean, he would say like off the cuff stuff that a lot of people found offensive, but when it came to really weird stuff, he always stayed away from that. He was never the type of person who was like, oh, like we need to ban, like abortion should be illegal everywhere. We need to like track people when like people have come out against like IVF and things like that. He's gone the opposite other direction. There's a sort of like hardline cultural conservatism, which sometimes, not always, but sometimes bleeds over into the sort of like racial stuff that he has always kind of stayed away from, because he knows that it is not a winning message and that it puts people off and that it weirds people out. And I don't think that Elon gets that, you know, and I think maybe that's in some reason it's kind of smart for Trump to let Elon take such a, you know, big position in the first couple of days, you know, months of this administration, because he's sort of acting as like a sort of human shield for everything that goes wrong, and everybody's just like blaming it all on Elon. But yeah, that's maybe off topic a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it is like in some ways a lot less subtle than what the left was doing, and so that probably means that people will catch on and be freaked out by it a lot quicker.
I mean, I know that you're not like a scholar of Elon Musk, or presumably you're not personal friends with him or anything, but what is your interpretation of his mindset or even his mental health at this point?
I don't know. I mean, I hate to like speculate, because I mean, I don't know his life, but I mean, he doesn't seem to be sleeping a lot. I don't know. Like he seems to be like it's tweeting many times per day. I think somebody counted last time, it was like tweet like 1,000 times last week or something. He's just like
1,000 times,
something like that. It was like some crazy number. Maybe that was made up, but it's a lot. I mean, I feel like every time I refresh my Twitter feed, there's something else.
Yes.
But he's also supposed to be running the government, and he has like 15 kids, and I'm like, what are you sleeping? And if you're not sleeping, are you using Adderall or what's going? I don't know what's going on, but it's very chaotic. I think the chaos too is, you know, that alone. I mean, this is a completely different subject, but I just think the chaos of what's going on right now is going to bother a lot of people, because people like the idea that they want change, but they also want the idea that somebody's like in control, and it doesn't seem like anybody really knows what's going on right now. Like when they sent that letter out last week, it was like everybody was like all over the place. It was like, do we reply? Do we not reply? Everything I'm working on is classified. Can I even reply to this? If I don't, am I going to lose my job? It's like, and then all the different agencies are like, don't reply, do reply. It's just complete chaos. You know, I write our newsletter. My job is to keep up with everything that's going on, and I can barely do it. So, I mean, if you're just a regular person, I can imagine how overwhelming it must be, unless you're just, you know, completely tuned out.
There's something to be said for being completely tuned out. I think that's going to
wish I could do it. Yeah.
This is the new flex, as I've been saying. When Elon did the very awkward, sort of half-baked Nazi salute, and that famous moment, was it during the convention? I can't remember when it was exactly. What side were you on with that interpretation? I mean, I have to admit that my initial reaction was that he's so awkward. This is like a very spectrum-y guy. He's kind of like trying to make a joke, but it doesn't land, and he didn't really do it right. And he's kind of flailing around, and he didn't mean it. But now I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe he's just like thinks this is a kind of like IRL version of a shitpost, and he sort of means it. What do you make of that?
I mean, honestly, that was always kind of what I thought. I thought he was just trying to be like an edgelord. And
Right.
now everybody seems to be doing it, right? Like Bannon did it the other day. It's
Yes.
CPAC, which, it's kind of funny because Bannon hates Elon. He went on like a tirade the other day and called him like an illegal immigrant and a parasite who's like wrecking the country. Because he's so, I mean, say what you will about Steve Bannon, he is like he's catty in a way that I kind of appreciate and think is funny. But yeah, everybody's kind of doing it now. And as Richard Hanania wrote for us, it's kind of like, you won. Why are you're acting like what you're doing is still subversive or whatever, but it's really not. Like your side won. And moreover, it's just weird. It's like, oh, it's the Roman salute. It's not the Nazi salute. I'm like, it looks like a Nazi salute. Nobody knows what you're talking about. This is where like the niche stuff gets in, where like if you're on right-wing Twitter 17 hours a day, you know what the difference between a Roman salute and a Nazi salute is. But the average person does that. You just look like a fucking Nazi, right?
So, how old are most of the people doing this? I mean, I know I asked you this at the beginning,
Steve
but like,
Bannon,
again,
70.
I know Steve Bannon is old, but like the people, like, because I always feel like this is something that is rooted in meme culture, in a vibe. My most generous interpretation is that a lot of the people doing this are young enough that they don't really connect this stuff with actual events. They see it as sort of it's a meme, it's a gesture, it's a joke, it's a feeling. Is that am I being too forgiving there?
Probably, yeah. I think everybody knows like what a Nazi salute looks like.
But yes.
But they're doing it. They want to seem edgy or whatever. But it's like, I don't know. To me, it's kind of like cringy and like, to me, it doesn't even really code as like super young. It codes as like an older sort of like early 2010s kind of like internet where there were actually, I think, a lot more people who were just posting like Groypers and like Hitler memes and stuff who weren't actually Nazis. They were just doing it because it was like they genuinely liked irritating people on the internet.
Yes.
And that was kind of a new thing to do back then. It sounds weird now, but but now I mean, that's just par for the course. It's like what our politics are now. It's just like doing things to spite people on the internet. So yeah, I don't know if, I don't think it's people are just being young and naive and dumb. I think a lot of it is, trying to get a rise out of people, but doing it in this ham-fisted way. And then also some of them mean it. And it's kind of difficult to tell which is which.
Right.
And, if you're posting like Holocaust denial on the internet, like I'm kind of like, I don't know, like, I feel like I don't have to give you a lot of grace because like, you know what you're doing. If you're doing it as a joke, then find something else to joke about,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you say, we see the Holocaust denial, greedy merchant memes, the idea that Jews are pushing interracial marriage. I saw, and these are big accounts. Like I saw a big account yesterday, posting the old, like, no Jews died in 9/11 because they were told to call in sick that day thing. I mean, that's old stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you do with somebody like JD Vance? Okay. Because he's somebody who should know better. He's a smart guy, obviously. Why do you think he is dabbling in this?
I think JD spent like a little too much time on like Twitter group chats, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've also I've been in the group chats. I've been, it's weirdly like, I'm not going to say the name of the podcast but like he went on like a niche internet podcast of like somebody that like I used to like kind of know on the sort of like dissident left. And like, it's like, once you're in that deep, it's like, it's unbecoming in a weird way, but I'm like, why are you like 2 degrees removed from me or from where I was like 3 years ago. Not necessarily in ideas, but like hanging around these weird internet people. Um, I think it's going to be more common. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it. I think like the generation of like up and coming politicians, especially on the right, and to probably actually more on the right, because if you're on the left, then you can like go work for an NGO or whatever and find all the same stuff. But if you're on the right, like you're going to end up in these weird internet spaces being, 3 degrees removed from a guy who's like talking about Holocaust denial or, crazy racial stuff. And then what do you do? And I don't know the answer to that. I would say that people just need to log off, but you can't really log off. Nobody's allowed to log off anymore. You have to be on the
Right.
internet, otherwise you're irrelevant. So
Right.
it's a real catch-22.
How old are you? Can I ask how old you are?
29.
You're 29. Okay, great. So this has been going on essentially for all of your adult life.
Yeah.
How, I mean, you're obviously a smart person and you're thinking a lot and you can step back and look at the big picture. But when you look at your friends, your peers, what do you think is going on in their minds, and how do you think they imagine the world and their lives in it?
That's a tough question to answer, because when it comes to like so I have like, there's like I have two different worlds. I have like this sort of online like media world, like those people I hang out with, those people are really engaged, and there's a lot of people are like super thrilled about Trump. They think everything is great. A lot of them really hate it and they're freaking out. When it comes to my friends in real life they're not online, they're not media people, a lot of them are just there's just this sort of ambient anxiety that I think is characteristic of my generation, this sort of zillennial, whatever you want to call it, generation where nothing seems very stable. Our adult lives have been sort of rife with all of this political instability, then COVID, then BLM riots, this weird swing back to the right, and like it's like everything is just sort of up in the air. A lot of people check out from politics, and then something weird happens and it freaks them out. They get sort of like spooked, and then that drives them to the polls or whatever. But I think a lot of it is a sort of nihilism and like a retreat into culture. And by that I don't mean political culture. I mean very sort of like niche online celebrity. If you go on TikTok now, like there's people who sit around all day and like post about nothing, but they have these giant followings. And there's all these different subcultures where a lot of people, not saying this is negative or anything, but they retreat into like a sort of like wellness thing. I think the wellness, the RFK, that's kind of become politicized in a weird way too now with the RFK. But, that's something I've seen a lot in my generation is, people becoming obsessed with their own health and their own bodies, I think, in a way, because you can have a certain degree of control over like how you look and how fit you are and like how well you eat and how much you go to the gym, and this sort of discipline, because you don't actually have control over your life. You can't buy a house, you can't find somebody to settle down with, but at least you can have a six-pack. Like I think like that's where a lot of like young men in my generation are, and in a way it's I guess it's better than them just like doing drugs or getting addicted to video games or to porn or whatever. But it's also it becomes neurotic sometimes. And I find it just kind of sad, because I feel like it does come from a place of a broader sort of powerlessness over your own individual life. To whereas, I feel like, maybe 20 years ago, they'll be like, yeah, I'll like have a beer and smoke a cigarette or whatever because I have a house and a wife and a kid. And, um, you know, I don't have to like be the best. I don't have to live forever. Like, I feel like nobody has like, uh, nobody's allowed to be mediocre anymore, or nobody.
Right. Well, there's no margin for error or something like that.
You're right. Yeah. There's nothing. There's no baseline for a normal life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's a big problem for a lot of people. And I think it manifests in a lot of different ways, but politically and otherwise.
So what you just described with men being obsessed with their bodies and what they look like in health, that is how we have traditionally talked about women with anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all encompassing. It's neurotic. It's solipsistic. It's narcissistic. It's incredibly. It belies a real sense of personal devastation and desperation.
Right, but the way
it's so interesting that men are doing this now. That's fascinating.
Right. Well, I find it interesting too because the way that it's always talked about with women is that it's society's problem. Like it's the
Right.
idea is that it's a societal problem, that it isn't just narcissism. It's that like society has these unrealistic beauty standards for women, and like part of that is true. I think
they play off of each other. I mean,
right.
that's half of it. Yeah.
And I think like that just sort of like gets ignored, with the male thing. But if you talk to anorexics, like female anorexics, a lot of them will tell you that it's not actually about societal beauty standards. It's about like feeling in control.
Yeah. Exactly.
And a lot of that was like really ignored by people who really wanted to push this cultural narrative. And it's like, no, these younger women are telling you that they don't feel in control of their own life. So the only thing they control is like what they eat or how much they throw up or
it's
whatever.
A trauma response also. I mean, it's all kinds of things.
Sure. But I think, we've always seen the body issues, the male eating disorders and all that. It was always kind of a thing among gay men. But we're seeing it a lot in like straight men too. And that's how I feel like, something is kind of happening in the culture where it's not just vanity. There's something deeper and more psychological going on here, in my opinion.
That is so interesting. And so they're doing this and yet they can't find a mate. Can they hook up? I mean, can you speak to this, like, why is nobody having sex thing? Is that a moral panic or is that true?
Well, I think that I come in for this from like the perspective of a gay guy, which is that, gay men have never had a problem like hooking up, famously. I think what straight people are like sort of living now is they're basically like everybody's living in a gay guy's world, as it were. And I don't think it's very good for straight people because, men, I think, are able, not all men, but I think men, generally speaking, are sex is more physical and you're able to sort of separate it in a way. And that's not necessarily true for women. And a lot of women, like, they don't want to just hook up. Or if they do, because, they have a lot more options, because most generally speaking, like a straight man is not going to say no if a decent looking woman is propositioning him. They tend to go for like these very sort of extremely attractive, successful men who are basically having tons of sex, and then everybody else, even like normal, pretty decently like good looking men, aren't. And that creates a lot of like resentment. And I think that's fueling a lot of the crisis in heterosexuality, I guess, that we see today.
Right. I mean, this is like Louise Perry has talked about the homosexualization of heterosexuality. And it's exactly what you describe. And I mean, there's a lot of factors. I think the birth control pill played a huge role in this, which I've talked about, and she talks about a lot too. And just this idea that men and women have equal sex drives, and everybody should, the sexual revolution represented progress, and old-fashioned courtship was a form of oppression, and et cetera, et cetera. But those guardrails were there for a reason. And, not to say that the lanes weren't perhaps too narrower than they should have been in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think we have had 50 years of a huge social experiment with this stuff. And we're now at a point of real reckoning.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think one thing that like ties that both straight people my age and gay people are going through is this sort of like dating app, social media fueled idea that there's always something better out there. Yeah. So like even like gay guys that I know, I'm unique in that like I got married at like 25 to, a guy that I met in college, like basically a child bride in gay years,
You're a straight gay guy.
Yeah.
You're wearing flannels. You got this is the heterosexualization of your homosexuality.
Yeah, right. But a lot of people feel, especially in like the professional classes, they're like, oh, this guy doesn't make enough money, or this girl doesn't make enough money, or we don't have the shared interest. We don't have enough, like, and then you can just go on an app and you can keep looking at people. And it's like this endless, it's like imagine you just need a shirt and then you go into a mall and there's 3,000 shirts and you keep, oh, this is a better one, but you can only buy one shirt. You can't buy them all. And like, that's like the bigger problem. I think even more so in some cases than hookup culture is just, and I'm not telling people to settle necessarily, but, my grandpa was a Baptist preacher. So you can imagine how the gay thing worked out. But was a Baptist preacher. And I remember in a sermon one time, he once said that love isn't a feeling, love is a choice. And I think that I've always like thought about that, and I've always remembered that. And I don't think people realize that today. They've been sold this idea of love as a super fleeting thing, and that you can always fall in love with somebody else. And people just get addicted to this, this endless sort of cycle of options and different people and feelings. And they're unwilling to miss out. It's this fear of missing out, fear of FOMO that just permeates our culture in all sorts of ways, but especially in dating. But we've gotten so far off topic now.
No, this is great. We'll circle back to the online, right? But this is fascinating. But when you say that they've been sold the idea that love is fleeting, where are they being sold that? Because we also have this concept that you have a soulmate and one true love, and the romantic comedies that ruined women's lives, thinking that they were going to like have the ultimate meet cute on the sidewalk and live happily ever after. So these are sort of two competing narratives.
Yeah, but my generation didn't grow up with rom-coms really. We grew up with like Euphoria and Skins and all of these like elaborate sort of highly sexualized like dramas where tragedy, like people like really want to believe that their lives are tragic, because a tragic life is so much more interesting than a happy one. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a lot of people who get caught up in that cycle where they're creating narratives in their own mind of like, if I'm hurting, if my heart is broken, if I'm, on this sort of Tolkien quest to find love, and I keep falling through all these pitfalls and all that, like that just makes me so much more interesting, most of all to myself. And I think there's a sort of like different type of narcissism at play there, because if you just fall in love and like, you end up with the person of your dreams, then you just become like everybody else, and you become like your middle-class parents,
Yeah. You're a normie. So is that why we have the crying TikTok videos in the car? Like everything is a trauma, and I'm devastated at all times.
Yeah. The urge for people to turn the camera on themselves in their worst moments is like something I just, I can't even, I understand it like cognitively, but like, it's just so far removed from like anything that I would ever do, that it still baffles me even as somebody, my age. But yeah, I mean, that you have been, if you were on social media, documenting your life. You have, it's almost like you are the star of your own TV show. And if you end up happy and everything all goes well, then your story ends, unless you can find a way.
The show's canceled. It's the end of the run. They're not renewing it. Right.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay. So where do like the incels fall into all of this? Like, are they, because they are obviously very into their victim status, but they can be quite aggressive. And there's a huge overlap between the incel culture and a lot of this, like, really ugly right-wing bigoted stuff. So where are they at? I mean, obviously they is a big word,
Yeah, I
tell us what you think.
I think a lot of them don't really understand women. There is something to, the idea that, like, if you are a super 10 out of 10 good looking guy or super rich or super whatever, that dating is going to be a lot easier for you. And that if you're just sort of average looking, then it's going to be harder, especially in the social media age. But, I know a lot of normal, even, kind of ugly straight guys who are like with beautiful women. It's like, if you have a good personality, like, women are a lot more amenable to that than I think people think. Like, it's another example of like the gayification a little bit of where because they have sort of like a very physical sort of male idea of sexuality, and they're projecting that onto women to like a really extreme degree. And I think like the apotheosis of this is the Chad meme. Have you seen this? It's like a German guy. He's actually a real guy, but he looks, it's cartoonish, almost like the super thick
lantern jawed
square jawline and the big brow and the grease back hair. And he's, got like a ripped, sort of like dehydrated six pack.
No, just what every woman wants.
Right. Yeah.
It's what every gay guy wants.
Yeah. I mean, right. Barely even that even more, but yeah, it's a very like, porny, sort of gay guy like idea of like male beauty is cartoonish in a way, but they think that this is what women actually want, when I don't know, like I feel maybe it's because I'm in the South, but like the women, I mean, they just want a guy who's like got big arms and is funny. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
and
just work on biceps even. And has a car,
has an apartment,
has a job, and like, is, treats her well. And I don't know. I feel like women want a lot less than people think that they do.
Well,
and it's moreover, it's just the incels, they just think that it's another, to get back to like the narcissism thing and like the tragic story. Once you adopt this identity of an incel, this has happened to people. Like, they develop these followings in these incel communities, and then they get a girlfriend, and then the other incels turn on them. So it's almost like, once you adopt this identity, it's really hard to get out of it, because one, it's like a psychological barrier where you're like, I'm an incel, I'm never going to get a woman. And so you don't even bother looking, or you happen into it. And then you're like, oh, am I going to lose all of my friends because we don't have this shared misery anymore? And this is a big problem. If you want to take it back to the left, misery loves company, but it creates terrible community and terrible politics. If all that you can organize around is a sort of like hopelessness, because this country is always racist and will always be racist. I'll never date women, and I'll always be an incel. Like, these are sort of two sides of the same coin. And it's not
it's
actionable.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And like, once you get into these communities and like you form an identity based around that, nothing is ever going, it can't accomplish anything because you've already accepted defeat as built in. And two, it's going to make you look insane and creepy and weird to everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I also think is that a lot of these guys, they see girls with OnlyFans. They see hypersexualized women, the very small minority of women who are making money on their looks and their bodies, women with OnlyFans, women with like, who are on sugardaddy.com or whatever it is. And because those are the only women they see, they assume that those are all women. And there's like an entire, most of the population of women, they're not noticing for some reason, either because these women are not as online or they're not like presenting themselves in as noticeable a way or whatever it is. And so it's like everybody is just reacting to a tiny, tiny minority fringe that happens to be very present online.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just a distorting way to go through life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I always like watching British TV shows, because they're brave enough to have like ugly people on TV, or not even just ugly people, just like regular looking people on just like a sitcom or whatever. Whereas
Right.
In America, like, this started in Hollywood and it's just kind of become the internet now, where like you will see people who are like so beautiful that like you don't want to look at them because it makes you feel terrible about yourself, or you see people who look really, really bad and then it makes you feel better about yourself, and everybody else just kind of like the algorithm, I don't know if it's the algorithm or they just post or what, but they just kind of filter into the background. And so it's like almost only like these two types of people exist, the super hot people and the super ugly people.
Right.
And that makes you think that you must be one or the other, when chances are you are neither.
Yeah, really. Don't flatter yourself with
Right,
one way
yeah.
or the other. But this is happening in like the UK, for example, right? I mean, we do have incel culture and a lot of this stuff overseas in Europe and elsewhere.
Sure,
and
yeah.
there's they can still watch like, British comedies, and that doesn't seem to be helping them.
That's true. That's true. It helps me though sometimes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Pro tip.
Yeah.
I mean, and just again to sort of circle back, but before we wrap up, I mean, for the last couple of years, the online right stuff that I was really noticing the most was this misogynist stuff, pronatalist stuff that veered into misogyny, obsession with the trad wife thing, posting pictures of beautiful women and saying that they're mid or that they hit the wall. Because if you're over 25, you're not going to be like, you've lose your fertility and you're of no use. I mean, this kind of this conception of the world that I think these guys are really enamored of, that has to do with like, we must procreate, we need to, everything is so terrible that we have to get back to this like very, very basic primal way of living, which they do have a point. Like I understand on a kind of cellular level where they're coming from. And it is true that I think several generations were misinformed about their own fertility. I'm always shocked by sort of millennial women who were never told that there's a biological clock somehow, because that was like unfeminist. I mean, that's just completely irresponsible. But obviously they took it too far. And I mean, the empty egg carton meme, I'd see that all the time, which is just, signal that a woman is old, is past her prime because she has no eggs left in the reserve. I mean, I don't really have a specific question, but like, what do you make of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, politically speaking, I think that a big problem is that it's almost impossible to afford to have a family now if you're a person who wants to be upwardly mobile, and that there's never really like a good time to have kids if you're a sort of striver type who's really focused on their career, especially if you're a woman. And I think a lot of that could be remedied by things like paid maternity leave being which is not mandated in this country, universal daycare. I mean, I'm like a Bernie bro. Like when it comes to economics, like I am very much on the left and always have been. But as for it is also a cultural problem, where people do have a hard time settling down, and by the time they settle down, it's maybe you can have one or two kids. And what the solution is to that, I have no idea. I don't know how far. I think all of the things around universal daycare and everything should be done in principle, because I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think that having a kid in this country should incur should mean financial ruin, and it kind of can if you're really living on the edge. But I don't know. It's tough. I certainly don't think that the solution is being mean to women, because in my experience, women are more interested in having kids than men are.
I wonder if that's starting to change. I have to
You
be
think?
honest with you. Well, I think that a lot of women were sort of bullied into denying that they wanted to have a family. I think that was going on for a long time. So they were ashamed to admit it because it was slapping the face of feminism or something like that. And I think that that's starting to change. I mean, there is obviously like this whole pronatalism movement that JD Vance is a part of, and I guess Elon is part of in his own weird way.
A grassroots activist, if you will.
Yes. I think it's fascinating, and but it's like I think that this economic piece needs to be talked about more, because people make fun of it. They say, oh, well, you just, there's never a good time to have kids, and your parents managed to, have kids, and everybody, lived in a 2-bedroom house, and 6 people shared a bathroom, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, my mom had me when she was 16 years old. If like 3 things in my life had gone differently, I'd be addicted to drugs, in prison, or in jail. Like, you know what I mean? Or dead. Like, you know what I mean? Like there are bad times to have kids. I mean, I got out lucky in part because my mom, became very, she was raised by a preacher. She sort of returned to like a sort of hardline Protestant conservatism, which saved my life probably. I mean, my dad was a drug dealer. So like there was a good thing that came out of that. But to say like there's no, I go back and forth on this, because I'm like, on the one hand, my parent, my mom, my stepdad, they didn't have a lot of money, and they still worked it out. They still had kids. And I don't think they regret it. I don't think that really anybody who struggles, financially when raising kids regrets it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you can't really blame people when they have $600 in savings, if they're lucky. I think the average American has 400 something. It's like some really small amount. And to look at that and to be like, I can't bring a kid into this situation. I can barely take care of myself. Mm-hmm. And so to just brush those concerns aside, I think it reeks of a sort of elitism, to where like you're not really worried about money, and you're only talking about these people who their concern is, oh, well, if I have a kid, I may not be able to, make 200 grand a year instead of 150 or whatever. And for those people, it's like, yeah, you should probably, if they want to have kids, they probably just need a reality check and just be like, you need to pull the trigger, right, because time's
or send them to private school or something like that.
Right. But that is not most people in this country. And I think a lot of people in this discourse, because those are the only people that they interact with, they get a twisted idea of like what people's actual motivations are for not having children.
Right. Yeah. And actually, this is what I was about to say about men possibly wanting kids more than women. Women can have a kid by themselves now. Sure. They don't need a man for that. And so that's been a huge game changer. And I know a lot of women who say, well, men are more trouble than they're worth. If I'm going to have a kid, I want one kid, not two kids. And if like I'm going to have to babysit this guy all day and support him and deal with him, I don't want to do it. And that's like another sort of downstream effect of the success of the women's movement, right? I mean, women have just like made stratospheric. They have their accomplishments have been off the charts, and they're doing much better than men across almost every metric. So I think that the frustration on the part of men that they can't sort of get the basic things that used to be necessary to be an adult. They can't have it. And women can kind of get a lot of that stuff by themselves. They're buying houses by themselves if they can. They're having a kid. They are pursuing careers. They're not living with their parents. And you can't say that about some, if not many, men.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of that's probably led to a lot of issues too, where a lot of men feel like, women, a lot of them don't want to be the breadwinner, but they are, or they would be in a lot of these relationships that they run into. And I think maybe this is where the homosexualification of, straight people's relationships might come into handy, where, maybe you can just tell yourself like, hey, it doesn't matter that much as long as the bills get paid. If you really want to be a team, maybe this isn't what you wanted, but this is how the world works now. The man isn't necessarily going to be the breadwinner, and that's a good thing for you. If he ever dies or something happens in a relationship, he leaves you, whatever. Like, you're not at sort of the mercy of a man, and that is a good thing, even though it may not necessarily feel great to you in the moment. But there is, that comes with more pressure, for women too, when they're not the breadwinner. So
okay. So to wrap up here, what do you think is going to happen to the political right now? Are they going to fall on their face? Is it imminent? Is it going to take a few years? Like, what's the prognosis here?
I can't say exactly when it'll happen. I think it'll be sooner rather than later. If they really get into the heads of the Trump administration and they start doing things like I believe it was like 2 state legislatures just passed a resolution calling on the Supreme Court to overturn gay marriage, for example. I think if something like that happened, there would be a massive backlash in the midterms, because that's 1 million marriages dissolved overnight. That's chaos. There's going to be there's a lot of gay people who work in the Republican Party. I don't think people realize this. Like, a lot of gay Republican apparatchiks, they're going to go crazy over that. The stories that will be leaked out of spite will be insane. And moreover, like, everybody just knows, everybody has a gay person in their family. Everybody has a gay friend. And if they see like something like that, like somebody's life just being blown up on a whim, like, that's going to, I think, have a similar effect that the overturning of Roe v. Wade did during the midterms last time. And more than that, I mean, even when it just comes to culture, I think if a lot of the things I'm seeing on Twitter start being trickling down to the masses, it's going to be ugly. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen. I just know it will happen, because this is that way that the internet works. It's the way it's always worked. And when it happens, the backlash will be very swift, because what's happening is freakish, and people will only suffer a freak for so long.
You really don't know how it's going to happen. I would like to know, because it's not going to be like how it was on the left with like the Gap making woke ads. It's not like, your favorite, jean company is going to post white supremacist memes.
Well, I think it's going to be
not going to work it into their ad campaign.
Well, if I had to guess, I think it will be something like, people doing Nazi salutes, like, people at CPAC doing Nazi salutes.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when Republican members of Congress start doing that because they've jumped on this weird train? What happens when you start hearing Republican politicians and like high profile people in the right wing commentariat, more of them anyway, start talking about things like interracial marriage? When that sort of thing starts happening, and you get, because Joe Biden was not like a blue haired, non binary,
Right.
whatever, but like he became associated with that by proximity. So once you start seeing more and more of these things, and the people doing the weird, freakish things are in closer and closer proximity to Republicans in power, like that's how it's going to happen. It's not necessarily going to be Trump like denying the Holocaust or whatever. It's going to be somebody like 2 degrees from Trump, denying the Holocaust, and then somebody 4 degrees removed doing a Nazi salute, and then some Doge employee, another one, I don't know, another Doge employee talking about interracial marriage, and some weird leaked group chat where a bunch of Republican congressmen are saying something crazy. It's like things like that just build and build and build and build. And nobody can quite say for certainty like what was the straw that brought the camel's back with like whatever you want to call quote unquote wokeness. But there was a straw somewhere along the way. But what matters more was all of these different things that got piled on again and again over the years to where people just finally said enough. And it'll be a process. But eventually, like, the pendulum will swing back, and I think it's going to swing back really, really hard.
Great.
And then the cycle will start again. There's like, you find political science have done charts on this, like the oscillation of like cultural politics from like left to right, and it just goes back and forth. And it's become more and more extreme. Since the advent of social media, and is there a way to break that cycle? I have no idea. But I hope there is. And I hope somebody figures it out.
Would your advice be to people on the left or people in the center to actually amplify this stuff as much as possible so they get exposed sooner than later?
No, I'm not an accelerationist. No, I think I don't know if I'm terrible at like giving advice. I'm a critic at heart, but I think, I'm glad that I wrote what I wrote in part just to say this is happening. And I think just pointing out like this is not normal when you see it to a certain extent, like I think that helps get the message across. I'm not calling for like a reinvigoration of Trump derangement syndrome or whatever. I think a lot of that went too far. I'm not calling for panic in some ways because I feel like there's just all this is somewhat inevitable because of the way that social media works. But my advice, I guess, would be to the left. When the pendulum swings back your way, don't do what you did last time. Remember that we still live in a democracy, and that the people that you talk to on Twitter are not the average person. But that the things that you say to each other and the weird party lines that you push will eventually make their way, will eventually break containment. And when that happens, you don't want it to be the most indefensible, crazy thing possible.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's well said. And I'm really glad you pointed this out. I did notice in the comments in your piece that a lot of people were saying they never saw this stuff. They didn't know what you were talking about. And I thought, wow, that's all I see, but that's because I click on it and I engage with it. So it just keeps feeding it to me. But I was pretty surprised the number of Free Press readers who claimed or at least pretended not to know what you were talking about.
Well, they'll see it soon enough.
Well, thank you for doing your part there. River, thanks for writing the piece. It was excellent. And thanks for talking with me. It's been
thanks for having me on.
Conversation. Okay. You've been listening to the Unspeakable Podcast. To support the podcast, go to meghandaum.substack.com or theunspeakablepodcast.com and become a paying subscriber. That gets you access to all of the episodes in their entirety, as well as to my writing and lots of other perks. You can also check out The Unspeakeasy, my free speech women's community, at theunspeakeasy.com. We have in-person retreats all over the United States, a membership-based online community, and also some stuff that includes guys, like courses and occasional co-ed retreats. And by the way, we often have guest speakers that have been guests on this very podcast. So check that out at theunspeakeasy.com. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for joining me. See you then.